You will be held accountable, and you will face the full force of the law. You can run, but you cannot hide from justice.
I only learned this morning that there was actually 3 women who had been brutally killed.
On July 9th, 2024, the bodies of these beautiful women were discovered in their Bushy, Hertfordshire home, triggering one of the most chilling manhunts in British history, all because of a single knock on the door.
A manhunt has been launched for 26-year-old Kyle Clifford from Enfield. Now, police have said Clifford may be in possession of a crossbow and have warned members of the public not to approach him.
Before we dive in, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. It helps spread these stories so more people can hear them. Carol Hunt had no reason to fear Kyle Clifford when he rang her doorbell that July afternoon. At 61, she was living the kind of life most people dream about in retirement. Her husband, John, was a beloved BBC racing commentator whose voice had become synonymous with horse racing across Britain. Their home in Ashland Close, Bushy, was tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac where neighbors knew each other's names and children played safely in the streets. Carol had raised 3 daughters in this house, Louise, Hannah, and Amy, and watched them grow into strong, independent women.
Honestly, one of the loveliest girl I ever knew. Always had a smile and very positive and hardworking. So genuinely a really, really sweet person.
Louise, 25, had turned her passion for animals into a thriving dog grooming business that she ran from a converted pod in her parents' garden. Customers loved her gentle touch with nervous pets and her infectious laugh that could calm even the most anxious animals. Hannah, 28, worked as a beautician and had found love with her partner, Alex Klein. She was the type of person who lit up every room she entered, always ready with a joke or a helping hand for anyone who needed it. But behind the perfect family facade, a storm had been brewing. Louise had recently ended an 18-month relationship with Kyle Clifford, a 26-year-old former soldier turned security guard. The breakup hadn't been mutual. Louise had grown tired of his controlling behavior, his jealousy, his need to monitor her every move. She'd finally found the courage to walk away on June 26th, just 2 weeks before that fatal Tuesday. What Carol didn't know as she opened her door was that Kyle Clifford had spent those 2 weeks planning something unthinkable. Within hours of Louise ending their relationship, he'd gone online and purchased a compound crossbow, a Horizon Cornet MXT-405 with a 200-pound draw weight capable of firing bolts at 405 feet per second. He'd also bought 6 crossbow bolts and a 10-inch butcher knife. These weren't impulse purchases. These were the tools of a man who'd already decided that if he couldn't have Louise Hunt, no one could.
Do you accept that you have meticulously planned this murder from the moment that you split up Louise?
The doorbell camera captured the moment Carol Hunt sealed her family's fate. Kyle Clifford stood on her doorstep, backpack slung over his shoulder, telling her he just needed to return some of Louise's things. Carol, being the kind and trusting woman she was, stepped aside and let him in. But why had Clifford chosen this particular Tuesday? The answer reveals the chilling level of premeditation behind his attack. He'd researched John Hunt's racing commentary schedule and knew that the BBC presenter would be away covering horse racing events. He'd deliberately timed his visit to ensure that only the women would be home, making them easier targets for what he had planned. The first 25 minutes inside the Hunt house remain largely unknown, but we know how they ended. Carol Hunt, who had welcomed this man into her home out of simple human kindness, was stabbed multiple times with the butcher knife Clifford had concealed in his backpack. The attack was savage, brutal, and utterly senseless. Carol fought for her life, but she was no match for a trained ex-soldier armed with a 10-inch blade. After murdering Carol, Clifford didn't flee. He didn't even panic. Instead, he calmly walked back to his car, retrieved the crossbow he'd hidden under a blanket, and returned to the house. Louise was somewhere in the house during her mother's murder. It's unclear at this point if she heard her struggling or screaming, but we do know that Clifford found Louise and restrained her with duct tape, binding her wrists and ankles. Then, in an act of pure evil, he raped her before loading a bolt into his crossbow and shooting her dead. But the nightmare wasn't over. Hannah Hunt was still alive, still unaware of the carnage that had unfolded in her family home. When she returned from work that afternoon, she walked into a scene from hell. Somehow, in those final moments, she managed to grab her phone and send a desperate message to her partner, Alex. "Kyle here. Police now. He's tying us up." Those 8 words would be Hannah's last communication with the outside world. Kyle Clifford, the man who claimed to love Louise Hunt, silenced her sister forever with another crossbow bolt. But here's what makes this case even more chilling. While Kyle Clifford was systematically murdering the Hunt family, Louise's dog grooming customers were coming and going from the business she ran in the garden pod. They had no idea that just meters away, a family was being destroyed by a jealous ex-boyfriend who couldn't accept rejection. What drives a man to plan and execute such calculated evil? How does an 18-month relationship end in the annihilation of an entire family? And why did Kyle Clifford believe that Louise Hunt owed him her life simply because she'd once shared it with him?
Britain is reeling tonight after the wife and 2 daughters of a well-known BBC sports commentator were killed in a shocking triple murder.
After receiving the text from Hannah, Alex Klein bolted to the Hunt family home at 7 p.m. that evening. And instead of his girlfriend alive, he discovered a crime scene so horrific that seasoned detectives would later struggle to process what they witnessed. 3 women lay dying in pools of blood, and somewhere in the growing darkness, their killer was on the run with a loaded crossbow. Carol Hunt lay motionless near the front entrance, her body bearing the savage wounds inflicted by Clifford's butcher knife. Louise was found restrained with duct tape, the crossbow bolt that ended her life still embedded in her body. Hannah, the woman Alex had planned to build a future with, had been struck down just hours after sending that desperate final text message. What happened in those first crucial minutes reveals the chaos and confusion that followed Clifford's rampage. Emergency responders initially treated the call as a potential fatal collision. The nature of the injuries was so severe that first responders couldn't immediately determine what had happened. Only when investigators began piecing together the evidence did the horrifying truth emerge. This wasn't an accident or a random attack. This was a targeted execution carried out by a man who knew exactly where to find his victims. But Kyle Clifford had vanished. As police cordoned off Ashland Close and began processing the crime scene, Britain's most wanted man was somewhere out there, armed and extremely dangerous. The manhunt that followed would grip the nation for 22 terrifying hours as armed police units scoured the countryside, looking for a killer who seemed to have disappeared into thin air. But who exactly was Kyle Clifford, and how had he become capable of such calculated brutality? Born on April 5, 1998, Clifford had served in the British Army before transitioning to work as a security guard. On paper, he seemed like an ordinary young man trying to build a life for himself. But those closest to him had begun to see warning signs that suggested something much darker lurking beneath the surface.
Police began the hunt for the 26-year-old after the bodies of the wife and 2 daughters of the BBC sports commentator were found in Hertfordshire.
Louise Hunt's decision to end their relationship hadn't come suddenly. Friends later revealed that Clifford's behavior had become increasingly controlling and possessive throughout their 18 months together. He monitored her movements, questioned her interactions with other people, and displayed the kind of jealous rage that characterizes the most dangerous domestic abusers. Louise had tried to make the relationship work, but eventually realized that staying with Kyle Clifford might cost her everything, including, tragically, her life. The digital evidence recovered from Clifford's devices would later reveal the depth of his obsession and the methodical planning behind his attack. Within hours of Louise ending their relationship on June 26th, he was already researching weapons online. He purchased the crossbow and butcher knife between June 27th and 30th, a 4-day window that shows just how quickly his thoughts turned to violence. But there's another disturbing element to Kyle Clifford's psychology that investigators uncovered. On July 8th, just 1 day before the murders, Clifford had been searching for Andrew Tate content on YouTube. Tate, the controversial influencer known for his misogynistic views about women and relationships, had built a following among men who felt entitled to control and possess women. While the judge would later rule this evidence too prejudicial to present to the jury, it raises chilling questions about the kind of toxic ideology that may have fueled Clifford's sense of ownership over Louise Hunt's life. What makes this case even more horrifying is the evidence that Clifford had researched John Hunt's racing commentary schedule to ensure he wouldn't be home during the attack. This wasn't a moment of blind rage. This was a carefully orchestrated plan to maximize his victim's vulnerability and minimize the chances of resistance. As darkness fell on July 9th, terror gripped communities across Hertfordshire and North London. Police had issued urgent warnings for the public to stay indoors while armed units searched parks, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings. Schools went into lockdown. Parents kept their children inside. An entire region held its breath while a crossbow-wielding killer remained at large. The scale of the manhunt was unprecedented. Helicopter units equipped with thermal imaging cameras swept across the countryside. Armed response teams moved through residential areas, checking sheds, garages, and any structure that could conceal a desperate fugitive. Police dogs trained to track human scent followed potential trails that led nowhere. For 22 hours, Kyle Clifford seemed to have simply vanished. But where do you hide when you're the most wanted man in Britain? Where do you go when your face is plastered across every news channel and social media feed? The answer would reveal something deeply disturbing about Kyle Clifford's state of mind in those final hours of freedom. The Hunt family's ordeal had rippled far beyond their quiet cul-de-sac in Bushy. John Hunt, who had built his career bringing joy to millions of racing fans across Britain, now faced returning home to a house where his wife and 2 daughters had been slaughtered. The BBC racing community rallied around him, with jockeys wearing black armbands at upcoming races and colleagues struggling to find words adequate to express their grief and outrage. What nobody knew during those agonizing 22 hours was that Kyle Clifford was slowly making his way to what he may have seen as a fitting location for his final act. Lavender Hill Cemetery in Enfield held some significance for him, perhaps a place from his childhood, perhaps somewhere he'd visited with Louise, perhaps simply a quiet spot where he thought he could escape the consequences of his actions. But Kyle Clifford's story wasn't destined to end with him simply disappearing into the night. At 6 p.m. on July 10th, armed police units finally tracked him down among the weathered headstones and ancient trees of the cemetery. What happened next would ensure that he survived to face justice for his crimes, but it would also leave him permanently changed in ways that seemed almost poetic in their irony. When police surrounded him in that cemetery, Kyle Clifford made one final decision that would define the rest of his life. Rather than surrender, rather than face the consequences of his actions like a man, he turned his own crossbow on himself. The crossbow bolt pierced Kyle Clifford's chest with the same brutal force he'd used to murder Hannah and Louise Hunt. But unlike his innocent victims, Clifford survived his self-inflicted wound, though the injury left him paralyzed from the chest down, confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Some might call it poetic justice. Others might say it was simply the universe ensuring he'd live long enough to face the full consequences of his crimes. The parallels weren't lost on anyone following the case. Kyle Clifford, who had stolen the mobility and freedom of 3 innocent women, would now spend every remaining day of his life unable to move his own legs or feel anything below his chest. The man who had destroyed the Hunt family's future had effectively destroyed his own as well.
The search for the triple murder suspect Kyle Clifford is over. Mr. Clifford was detained this evening inside Lavender Hill Cemetery here in Enfield and North London Hertfordshire police say that no shots were fired. During the hunt, they spent around 2 hours inside this cemetery earlier.
While Clifford fought for his life in the Royal London Hospital, the true scope of his planning became clear to investigators. Digital forensics revealed a timeline that chilled even experienced detectives. They found more digital evidence on Clifford's phone, notes that read, "I don't want to live my life without her." These weren't the desperate scribbles of a man in the throes of passion. They were the calculated writings of someone who believed Louise Hunt belonged to him so completely that her independence justified mass murder. The contrast between Clifford's selfish obsession and the Hunt family's genuine love for each other couldn't have been starker. As investigators delved deeper into the victims' lives, they discovered a family built on mutual respect, support, and unconditional love, everything that Kyle Clifford seemed incapable of understanding or providing. Carol Hunt had been the heart of her family, the steady presence who had supported John's demanding career while raising 3 strong daughters. Friends described her as endlessly generous, the type of person who would drop everything to help a neighbor in need. She'd opened her door to Kyle Clifford that Tuesday afternoon because kindness was simply her nature, a quality that her killer had exploited and destroyed. Louise Hunt's dog grooming business had been more than just a career. It was her way of bringing joy and comfort to both pets and their owners. Customers remembered her patience with difficult animals, her genuine care for every dog that came through her garden pod, and her infectious enthusiasm for her work. She'd built something meaningful and independent, exactly the kind of life that Kyle Clifford couldn't tolerate her having without him. Hannah Hunt's final moments revealed the strength and love that defined the entire family. Even as Kyle Clifford hunted her through her own home, she'd managed to send that desperate text to Alex Klein. During Clifford's 10-week hospital stay, the investigation continued to build an overwhelming case against him. Physical evidence linked him definitively to the crime scene. His palm print was found in the Hunt home. CCTV footage tracked his movements before and after the murders, and the weapons recovered from the cemetery matched the injuries inflicted on his victims. But Clifford wasn't cooperating. When detectives finally interviewed him on September 16th, after he'd spent 10 weeks recovering under police guard, he answered no comment 28 times. Even faced with irrefutable evidence of his guilt, he refused to show any remorse or accountability for the lives he'd destroyed. Not stopping there, the legal proceedings that followed would test the British justice system's ability to handle a defendant who seemed determined to inflict maximum additional pain on the victims' families. When Clifford was charged on September 17th with 3 counts of murder, false imprisonment, weapons offenses, and later SA, he initially pleaded not guilty to all charges. This meant that John Hunt and his surviving daughter Amy would have to endure a trial, reliving the worst day of their lives in excruciating detail, while Clifford sat just meters away in his wheelchair. The psychological torture of forcing grieving families through unnecessary trials is one of the cruelest aspects of cases like this, and Kyle Clifford seemed determined to extract every possible ounce of suffering from the people he'd already devastated. The case highlighted disturbing gaps in British law regarding crossbow regulation. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper announced an urgent review of crossbow laws in July of that year, noting that these powerful weapons could be purchased online with no background checks, no licensing requirements, and no questions asked. Kyle Clifford had been able to acquire a weapon capable of killing at hundreds of feet, with less scrutiny than would be required to adopt a pet. What kind of society allows domestic abusers to purchase military-grade weapons with the click of a button? How many more Louise Hunts have to die before lawmakers take meaningful action to protect women from their violent ex-partners? The ripple effects of Clifford's crimes continued to spread through the racing community and beyond. Jockeys wore black armbands in honor of the Hunt family. Television commentators struggled to maintain their professional composure when discussing John Hunt's unimaginable loss. A community vigil at St. James's Church in Bushy drew hundreds of mourners who had never met the family, but were united in their grief and outrage. But perhaps the most telling detail about Kyle Clifford's character came from his family history. His brother Bradley was already serving a life sentence for the 2017 murder of Soban Khan. Violence, it seemed, ran in the Clifford family, though that fact provided no comfort to the Hunts, and certainly no excuse for Kyle's crimes. As 2024 turned to 2025, Kyle Clifford faced a choice that would define how history remembered him. Kyle Clifford walked into Cambridge Crown Court on January 22, 2025, and finally spoke the words that John Hunt and his surviving family had been waiting 7 months to hear: guilty. But even in this moment of apparent accountability, Clifford couldn't resist inflicting one final act of cruelty on the people he'd already destroyed. He admitted to murdering Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt. He confessed to falsely imprisoning Louise and possessing offensive weapons. But he maintained his innocence on the SA charge, forcing the family to endure a trial that would dissect the final, most intimate moments of Louise's life. This wasn't justice. This was psychological torture disguised as legal procedure. Kyle Clifford, the man who had shown no mercy to 3 innocent women, was demanding mercy for himself while simultaneously forcing their loved ones to relive every horrific detail of that July afternoon. The cowardice was breathtaking, even by the standards of someone who had already proven himself capable of unthinkable evil. The trial that followed revealed depths of depravity that shocked even seasoned legal professionals. Prosecutors presented evidence that Louise Hunt had been bound with duct tape at her wrists and ankles before being sexually assaulted and murdered. The attack hadn't been quick or merciful. It had been prolonged, deliberate, and designed to maximize her suffering. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was torture carried out by someone who believed Louise Hunt owed him access to her body simply because they had once been in a relationship. But Kyle Clifford's final act of cowardice was still to come. Rather than face his victim's family during the trial, rather than look John Hunt in the eye as evidence of his crimes was presented, Clifford refused to leave his cell at HMP Belmarsh. The trial proceeded in his absence, with his empty wheelchair serving as a stark reminder of his refusal to take responsibility for his actions, even after pleading guilty to murder. The jury took just hours to deliver a unanimous guilty verdict on the R-word charge. The evidence was overwhelming, the timeline clear, and Clifford's claims of consensual contact were, in the words of prosecutors, utterly untenable. Louise Hunt had been murdered by the man she'd trusted enough to date for 18 months, violated by someone who claimed to love her, and silenced forever by a person who couldn't accept that love requires respect, not ownership. On March 11, 2025, Mr. Justice Joel Benathan delivered a sentence that ensured Kyle Clifford would never again walk free among decent people. A whole life order, meaning no possibility of parole, no chance of redemption, no opportunity to inflict further harm on innocent families. At 26 years old, Kyle Clifford would spend the next 50 or 60 years contemplating his crimes from a prison cell, paralyzed and alone. But the most powerful moments of that sentencing hearing came not from the judge's legal pronouncements, but from the victim impact statements delivered by the people Kyle Clifford had tried to destroy. John Hunt, the BBC racing commentator whose voice had brought joy to millions, stood before the court and called Clifford exactly what he was, a psychopath.
In an impact statement he read out, he said, "Just remember one thing, whatever misery lies ahead for you, on your dying day there will be no release for you. The screams of hell, I can hear them now when they roll the red carpet out for you. Your miserable fate will last for eternity."
You killed 3 beautiful mockingbirds who meant no harm to anyone, John Hunt told the empty wheelchair where Clifford should have been sitting. You destroyed our family and left a hole in our lives that can never be filled. But you haven't broken us. Love survives even your hatred. Amy Hunt, the surviving daughter who had lost her mother and both sisters in a single afternoon, spoke with a strength that would have intimidated the man who'd tried to destroy her family, if he'd had the courage to attend his own sentencing. "You've earned your rightful spot in hell," she told the absent killer. "My family was everything good in this world, and you were everything evil. History will remember them with love and you with contempt." The judge's own words captured the essence of Kyle Clifford's character with surgical precision. He described him as a jealous man soaked in self-pity who held women in utter contempt. These weren't the crimes of someone who had simply lost control. They were the calculated actions of someone who believed women existed solely for his benefit and entertainment. The broader implications of this case extend far beyond one family's tragedy. Kyle Clifford had been able to purchase a military-grade crossbow online with no background checks, no waiting periods, and no questions asked. The same man who had already shown controlling and abusive behavior toward Louise Hunt was able to acquire a weapon capable of killing at hundreds of feet more easily than he could have adopted a pet or obtained a driver's license. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's promised review of crossbow laws remains pending, while other potential victims remain vulnerable to similar attacks. How many more families will be destroyed before lawmakers find the political will to prioritize women's safety over the convenience of online weapons sales? The Hunt family murders also highlight the deadly escalation that characterizes domestic violence cases. Kyle Clifford didn't go from loving boyfriend to family annihilator overnight. There were warning signs, patterns of control and jealousy that preceded the final explosion of violence. Louise Hunt had recognized these signs and found the courage to leave, but she paid for that courage with her life. This case should serve as a wake-up call for anyone who minimizes the threat posed by controlling partners or dismisses domestic violence as a private matter. Kyle Clifford's sense of ownership over Louise Hunt didn't end when their relationship did. It intensified into a murderous rage that consumed an entire family. The Hunt family's legacy won't be defined by the evil that Kyle Clifford brought into their lives. It will be remembered through John Hunt's continued work, through the dog grooming business that Louise built, through Hannah's infectious laugh, and through Carol's boundless kindness. They were everything good about human nature, destroyed by someone who represented everything we should fear and reject. Kyle Clifford joins approximately 70 prisoners, serving whole-life orders in British prisons, a small but necessary population of individuals deemed too dangerous to ever be released. He'll spend the rest of his days in a wheelchair, paralyzed and forgotten, while the family he destroyed is celebrated and remembered with love. The Hunt family tragedy is shocking not only for its brutality, but also for the chilling echoes it has with other family annihilation cases we've seen before. What makes it even more haunting is that this is not the only case where women became the central targets of such violence. In fact, another case we covered earlier carries strikingly similar themes of control, rage, and destruction within the home. To understand the disturbing pattern, let's revisit the Kaler family murder.
Hold on. Don't move.
I'm here.
I know. Don't move.
I don't want to die.
We're going to take care of you, okay?
Make me alive.
These were the chilling final moments of a 16-year-old, a child who became the third of 4 victims, murdered by the very man she once called her dad. To the outside world, the Kaler family was the epitome of the American dream. Successful, beautiful, and seemingly perfect. Neighbors admired them, friends envied them, and strangers wished for a life like theirs. But behind that polished facade lay a storm of secrets, manipulation, and simmering rage. The cracks in their picture-perfect life grew too wide to hide, and when they finally broke, it wasn't just a family falling apart, it was a tragedy that no one could have imagined. James Craig Kaler, the patriarch, appeared to have it all. With a 6-figure salary and a stable career, he was the provider of a dream life. His wife, Karen, embodied the perfect housewife and supermom. managing the home and supporting their 3 kids, Emily, Lauren, and Sean. From straight-A report cards to local sports stardom, the Kaler kids seemed to thrive under their parents' guidance. They were everything a family was supposed to be, or so it seemed. Let's rewind the clock, and you'll find the story of how this perfect family was built on sacrifices, compromises, and silent struggles. For starters, Karen gave up her dreams of earning an engineering degree to marry Craig and support his ambitions. The couple tied the knot in December 1985 and moved to Colorado, where Craig had landed a promising job. At the time, Karen was still in her second year of college, with several years left to complete her degree. But she couldn't bear the idea of a long-distance relationship, so Karen made a life-changing decision. She left school to focus on her marriage and Craig's career. It was a sacrifice she wholeheartedly embraced, determined to create a happy life together. Their first major milestone came on April 8, 1991, when Karen gave birth to their eldest daughter, Emily. Life seemed picture perfect. Craig's career continued to flourish, while Karen took on the role of a stay-at-home mom. However, Karen's mother, Pat, noticed how Karen was always putting Craig's needs before her own, even after just having a baby. It seemed off, like Karen wasn't living for herself anymore. In 1992, Craig's career brought another change, a lucrative job opportunity in Greenville, Texas. The family relocated, and in May 1993, they welcomed their second daughter, Lauren. By all appearances, the Kalers had it all: Craig's professional success, Karen's dedication to her family, and 2 bright, thriving daughters.
Emily was the firstborn, and she was a smart kid, a pleaser, wanted to do good, kind of like her mom, creative and smart. Emily played the drum set and sang, and Lauren played the bass and sang.
Yet beneath the surface, tensions quietly simmered. One of those tensions arose from a disagreement over having more children. Karen felt their family was complete with 2 kids, but Craig wanted another. In a strikingly unorthodox move, the couple created a written agreement. Karen consented to having 1 more child, on the condition that she could undergo a procedure to prevent any further pregnancies afterward. Craig agreed, and in March 1999, their son, Sean, was born. To honor their agreement, Craig later underwent a vasectomy, ensuring no more surprises in their growing family. By this point, life seemed to stabilize. Craig's next job opportunity led them to Weatherford, Texas, a quiet suburb near Dallas, where his career continued to ascend. Once again, Karen adapted, immersing herself in her new community. She joined a local moms group and eventually became its president, building a strong network of friends and resources. She also made sure her kids stayed active and involved. Emily excelled in school and music, Lauren thrived in sports and band, and Sean became a rising baseball star. From the outside, it looked like the perfect life. But Craig's obsession with perfection left little room for anything less than flawless. He held everyone to incredibly high standards, including his own family. His daughter Lauren, who struggled with ADD and didn't get straight A's like Emily, became a target for his criticism. To Craig, Lauren wasn't good enough, and he didn't hesitate to ridicule her for it. And Craig's need for control didn't stop at his family. People began to see him as uptight, rude, and almost arrogant. His obsession with appearances made him difficult to work with. He had little respect for women in leadership roles, even telling others that they didn't belong in those positions. He also gained a reputation for being cheap, borrowing tools for home projects instead of buying them, tagging along to strip clubs with coworkers, and asking them to buy him dances. Despite earning a solid $180,000 a year, Craig kept a tight grip on the family's finances. Karen had a strict weekly allowance, and every time she went shopping, she had to save the receipts. Craig would scrutinize each one when he got home, blowing up in anger if he thought something was unnecessary or too expensive. But it wasn't just about money. Craig's control extended to every aspect of their life, even their sex life. Every night at 8:30 p.m., Karen had to be in bed for their routine. If she took a phone call after 8 p.m., she would whisper to her friends, apologizing and saying she had to go because Craig required her to be in the bedroom at a specific time.
If she didn't do what he wanted, bedtime at 9, she would, quote, pay for it.
It became such a routine that their kids even knew not to disturb them after 8:30. Even when Karen was sick, she had to comply with Craig's demands. Refusing him was dangerous. His anger would often turn violent, and Karen knew it was easier to just give in. Now, things haven't always been this way. When they first got together, Karen's life wasn't controlled so strictly, but as time went on, Craig's demands grew more extreme. He even suggested bringing a third person, specifically a woman, into their relationship, just to watch Karen and her together. Karen wasn't comfortable with this at all, but she found it difficult to say no. Desperate for some space and something of her own, Karen secretly joined a gym. She'd always enjoyed working out, and it was a way to regain some control over her life. Craig, ever controlling, refused to pay for the membership, so Karen worked odd jobs, like baking cakes, to fund it herself. By January 2006, she had saved enough to join Powerhouse Gym, and she quickly became a regular. Eventually, she even took on a part-time job as a personal trainer. Surprisingly, Craig didn't mind her working at the gym, but he set one condition. She had to be home by the time the kids returned from school. And just like always, Karen excelled at whatever she did. She quickly made friends at the gym and soon developed a habit of complaining about Craig at work. She'd talk about how angry he always was, how nothing she did ever seemed good enough, and how they were constantly fighting. Their fights were so intense that sometimes one of the kids would have to intervene just to break it up. On a bad day, things would get physical, and Karen would end up with bruises to prove it. Everyone at the gym knew about her unhappiness and how she wanted out of the relationship, but Craig's control over her was suffocating. She was nearing her breaking point, and things only seemed to get worse when she met a personal trainer named Sunny. Sunny was calm and understanding, and she helped Karen open up about the darkest parts of her relationship, things she couldn't share with anyone else. Over time, Sunny and Karen became more than friends. The two grew romantically and sexually intimate. There's some speculation about how this happened. Some believe that Craig encouraged it after he had previously asked Karen to bring a third person into their relationship, while others think Karen and Sunny had already started an affair before Craig even knew about it. Regardless of how it began, their relationship evolved into a threesome. Craig even sent Sunny flirty texts, bought flowers for both women, and encouraged them to take weekend getaways. However, later on, he denied pushing the two together. While Karen and Sunny's relationship was out in the open, Craig told a different story. He claimed that Karen was ruining their marriage, and the biggest issue was that his carefully curated image of the perfect family was crumbling. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. In 2008, Craig saw an opportunity to regain control. He was offered a job in Columbia, Missouri, that paid more than his current position, and it would separate Karen from Sunny. He accepted the job offer immediately. Karen, however, was devastated. She didn't want to leave Sunny but also had roots in Weatherford. Her kids were involved in school activities, the girls were in a band, Sean was playing baseball, and Karen had deep ties to local volunteer groups. Still, as always, Craig's wishes prevailed. He moved to Columbia a few months before Karen, leaving her to wrap things up at home. During this time, Karen and Sunny decided to stay together long distance, though Craig had no idea. He thought it was just a temporary fling, and once he separated them, Karen would return to the obedient wife he expected her to be. When Karen eventually moved to Columbia with the kids, Craig believed everything was back to normal. He even allowed her to enroll in the University of Missouri for a health science degree and continue working as a fitness instructor. However, after her time with Sunny, Karen had experienced a taste of freedom. She wasn't satisfied with just being allowed to go to school or work. She didn't want a life where Craig felt entitled to control her every move. Once Craig realized he was losing control over his wife, Karen, he began to tighten his grip even harder. He started obsessively monitoring her every move, who she talked to, what was in her emails, where she went, and it quickly spiraled into a complete invasion of her privacy. This toxic obsession reached its breaking point in December 2008 during an old friend's New Year's Eve party in Weatherford. Neither Craig nor Karen expected Sunny to be at the party, but when they walked in, there she was, the last person Craig ever wanted to see. To make matters worse, Karen was openly flirty with Sunny. They were laughing, hugging, drinking from the same glass with 2 straws, and even getting cozy in front of everyone. At this point, Craig was furious. His jealousy and rage took over, especially because the relationship between Karen and Sunny was now completely public. In Craig's mind, it was a complete slap in the face, and the disrespect was unbearable. The anger exploded at the party, with Craig screaming at Karen and Karen screaming back. It wasn't just a private argument, it was a spectacle. Their fight became so intense that Craig, humiliated and furious, declared to the entire party that Karen was having an affair. In retaliation, Karen kissed Sunny right in front of everyone. The host, understandably uncomfortable, asked them to leave, but the drama didn't end there. The fight continued outside on the front lawn, and it soon turned physical. Craig, consumed by his anger, shoved Karen, causing her to fall and hit her head on the ground. By the morning, both of them were reeling from the fallout. Karen, despite the chaos, began to have second thoughts about the way she was pushing Craig. She told Sunny that they needed to take a break from their relationship, but Sunny wasn't having it. She told Karen that the problem wasn't with her, but with Craig. Sunny was deeply concerned for Karen's safety, especially after witnessing his violent outbursts. So, in late January 2009, Karen made the brave decision to file for divorce. She didn't leave the house immediately, but she started sleeping in a separate room. She also continued her long-distance relationship with Sunny. Craig, still obsessively controlling, kept monitoring Karen's emails and even went through her things. He found multiple greeting cards from Sunny and used that to track her every move. Each time Karen made plans to meet Sunny, Craig would follow her, trying to sabotage their time together. His jealousy knew no bounds. At work, Craig became increasingly unhinged. He would carry around a photo album, showing it off to coworkers and saying things like, "Isn't this a happy family? Why doesn't Karen want to be a happy family?" His bizarre behavior made everyone uncomfortable, but Craig didn't seem to notice or care. He was too consumed by his need to control Karen's life. The tension reached a boiling point in March 2009, after Craig gave a speech at a city council meeting. Karen, there to support him, was dragged into another heated argument. This time, Craig's anger turned physical. He assaulted Karen, and she called the police. Craig was arrested for third-degree domestic assault. In her statement to the police, Karen described how Craig physically blocked her exit, cornering her against a cabinet, and how his behavior had grown increasingly violent and controlling over time. Despite Craig's denial of the assault, claiming he was only trying to give Karen a hug, the marks on Karen's body told a different story. Craig was arrested and charged. Karen moved out of their home, taking the kids with her, and rented a place on the other side of Columbia. She also withdrew $50,000 from their shared bank account, signaling that she was finally breaking free from Craig's toxic and dangerous control. Now, the arrest of Craig was nothing short of devastating. As a city official, his actions were front-page news, and when his bizarre and unsettling behavior at work came to light, it only made things worse. Eventually, the city issued a public statement saying Craig resigned due to difficult family issues, but the truth was far more complicated. The fact that he had been fired, not by choice, was a blow to his already fragile ego. He couldn't handle the fact that his once perfect reputation was now in tatters. No job, no family, and no control over anything. Craig packed up and left his house, heading back to his parents' farm in Kansas. He hoped that hard work on the farm would help clear his mind, but the distance didn't make things better. If anything, it fueled his obsession with Karen, his ex-wife. Craig couldn't understand why Karen had left him. In his mind, he had been the perfect husband. He had provided everything, and yet she walked away. He refused to accept that his controlling behavior could have pushed her to the brink. At this point, he still stalked her, reading her texts, emails, and even her cards. He couldn't let go, and he blamed Sonny for everything. When Sonny sent Craig a text telling him Karen didn't love him the way he thought, Craig became enraged. He started calling Karen and Sonny names, using homophobic slurs, even though he had been okay with Karen's relationship with Sonny, as long as he could watch and be involved in some twisted way. But what really pushed him over the edge was his daughters turning away from him. They were tired of his controlling ways and wanted to make their own choices. Emily, his oldest daughter, was the first to break away. She picked a college he didn't approve of, showing she wasn't going to live by his rules anymore. To Craig, this felt like a slap in the face. He blamed Karen even more, saying she had brainwashed the girls into going against him. Things only got even worse when one of his daughters posted on Facebook, admitting she was bisexual. Instead of supporting her, Craig saw this as another reason to lash out. He was convinced their mom had influenced this too. Interestingly, he started building a massive case against Karen, collecting over 3,500 pages of so-called evidence for his divorce attorney. This included screenshots of Karen and Sonny's private messages and notes about every time Karen visited Sonny. He even claimed that the two women had sex in front of the kids, but he never showed any proof of this. Craig's behavior became even more bizarre and disturbing. He told his friends about wanting to kill Sonny, but no one took him seriously. It's a common theme in these cases. People ignore the red flags until it's too late. It's also important to note that despite his rage toward Karen and Sonny, Craig was also sleeping with multiple women. His behavior was all over the place, but when it came to his son, Sean, things seemed a bit different. According to Craig, Sean was the one person who hadn't completely turned his back on him. Craig made an effort to spend time with his son, taking him hunting and fishing, trying to stay involved in his life. While he may have been a terrible husband to Karen and a distant, controlling father to his daughters by all accounts, he was still trying to be a decent dad to Sean. It was as if Sean was the last shred of hope for Craig, the one connection that hadn't been completely destroyed. Fast forward to Thanksgiving 2009. While Sean was with Craig, Karen was still trying to keep her family close. She wanted all of her children and her girlfriend Sonny to visit her grandmother Dorothy during the holiday. So, the day after Thanksgiving, Karen went to pick up Sean from Craig's house and take him to Dorothy's. Dorothy, who was 89 years old, lived in a quiet farmhouse in Burlingame, Kansas, a tiny town with less than 1,000 residents. But on Saturday, November 29, 2009, a deputy was wrapping up some paperwork when a call came in about a suspicious vehicle in Burlingame. It was just after 6 p.m. when a neighbor reported that a small truck had been speeding through the area. They watched as the driver pulled up, got out of the truck, and started walking down the road. A few moments later, the man came back carrying a large object they couldn't identify. Fearing that it may have been a robbery, the neighbors grabbed a flashlight and went outside to confront him. But before they could get close, the man placed the object in the back seat of the truck, climbed in, and sped off. The neighbors quickly called the sheriff's office, and the deputy set out to investigate. But just minutes later, another call came in, one that would lead to a much darker discovery. The deputies immediately knew this was serious, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would find when they arrived. As they entered Dorothy's home, the first person they found was Dorothy herself. She was bleeding heavily on the kitchen floor, having been shot several times. She was still alive, but barely. They rushed to the next room, where Karen was found in the dining area. She had been shot twice and was already dead. In the lounge, they discovered 18-year-old Emily lying behind the couch. She, too, had been shot twice. The second shot likely paralyzed her instantly, and she had died. Then the deputy heard a faint voice calling for help from upstairs. It was Lauren. 16-year-old Lauren was still alive, but her injuries were severe. Like Dorothy, she had been shot multiple times and was barely holding on. As she was taken away, Lauren whispered the name Craig. When asked who that was, she weakly replied, "My dad."
Hold on. Don't move.
I'm here.
I know. Don't move.
I don't want to die.
I'm going to take care of you, okay?
Make me alive.
And it didn't take long before Lauren, too, succumbed to her injuries and died. Dorothy, who had been fighting for her life with everything she had, followed soon after. That left us with the only surviving member of the family, Sean, an unwilling witness to this senseless bloodshed. According to his account, he and Karen had been sitting together, cleaning some old coins when the nightmare began. Without warning, Craig burst through the back door, rifle in hand, and opened fire on Karen. In the chaos, Sean ran for his life, desperate to escape. He scrambled for Karen's phone to call for help, but before he could, more gunshots echoed through the house. Terrified, he knew he had to get out, and so he fled, running for the neighbor next door. Understandably, a search warrant was issued immediately for Craig, and it didn't take long for the authorities to locate his car, abandoned in the middle of nowhere, eerily out of place. Inside, the officers found a chilling scene: a stash of more ammunition, unopened bottles of anxiety medication, and a backpack packed with the essentials such as soap, toilet paper, and canned food, as if he had been preparing for something. But Craig himself was nowhere to be found. Hours later, though, he was spotted wandering aimlessly down a deserted road, disheveled and looking lost. When he saw the officers approach, he didn't try to run. Instead, he muttered, "I'm the guy you're looking for," and was arrested without a struggle. Craig's defense team argued that his mental health issues, including depression and multiple personality disorders, pushed him to the brink. They claimed he had snapped, unable to control his actions. However, the prosecution painted a much darker picture, one of a man whose actions were chillingly premeditated. To back up their claims, they presented a crucial piece of evidence. Craig's expert psychiatrist testified that while he did suffer from depression, he still had the clear ability to plan the murders. The fact that he spared Sean's life was a key detail, demonstrating that his actions were calculated, not impulsive. 2 years after the murders, the final trial began. Sean, now 12, showed extraordinary bravery as he took the stand to recount the horrifying events. With striking clarity, he described the moment he witnessed his father shoot his mother and the chaos that followed. His testimony left no doubt. Craig's actions weren't a spur-of-the-moment lapse in judgment, but the culmination of months of simmering rage and calculated intent. Sonny also took the stand, shedding light on the abusive relationship between Karen and Craig. She recounted her attempts to protect Karen from Craig's volatile behavior, revealing that he initially appeared unfazed when she and Karen began their relationship. However, his demeanor shifted drastically, becoming hostile only after Karen decided to leave him. However, Sonny also admitted that her testimony was based on memory and what she had heard from Karen without physical evidence to back it up. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Craig was guilty of capital murder. His plea of insanity was rejected, leaving him to face the harshest punishments, either the death penalty or life without parole.
Kaler showed no emotion today as he heard his fate. The execution sentence comes as retribution for the shooting deaths of 4 family members.
Court at this time sentences the defendant for the crime of capital murder to death.
James Craig Kaler opted not to speak on his own behalf and even asked if he could leave the room to avoid hearing the victim impact statements. Chief Judge Philip Fromm ordered him to stay.
I loved Grandma White, Karen, Emily, and Lauren very much, and will miss them until the end of my days.
For many in the courtroom, justice had been served. But for Sean, the outcome was far from a relief. Sean, now 12 years old, had already endured unimaginable loss. He stood in court, his voice steady yet filled with emotion, and said, "I do not want my dad to receive the death penalty because it would be hard on my grandparents. I do not want my whole family gone." These words, spoken by a child who had witnessed so much pain, left many stunned. Despite Craig's horrific actions, Sean still saw him as a father, a man who, in his eyes, had been kind and loving to him. Craig, on the other hand, showed no regret for the lives he had taken. After his sentencing, he began writing letters to various people, including the lead prosecutor. These weren't apologies. Instead, Craig claimed he felt relieved by what he had done, insisting that he had freed Sean from what he called a toxic environment. Craig's legal team quickly filed an appeal to the Kansas Supreme Court. They argued that the jury had been biased and claimed that his mental health issues hadn't been properly considered during the trial. But the court disagreed. One judge stated that Kansas law doesn't exonerate someone just because they're mentally ill, and another pointed out that Craig's mental health had been considered during sentencing. It just didn't excuse what he had done. In the end, Craig's appeal was denied. His options for further legal action grew slim, leaving him to face the consequences of his choices. As of now, he remains on death row, a stark reminder of the heinous crimes he committed. Justice may have been served, but it's hard to say if that truly balances the scale for the lives lost. We can only hope he spends his remaining days haunted by his actions, paying for the devastation he caused. As for Sean, his story is one of incredible resilience. Despite the trauma and struggles he endured, he managed to rise above it all. He graduated high school and now works in Kansas, a living testament to strength and perseverance in the face of unimaginable tragedy. His journey inspires hope, proving that even in the darkest times, there's a way forward. But what about this case sticks with you? Do you think this tragedy could have been prevented with the right intervention or support? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.